Hey, it's Sauce, and as many of you may know, I recently hiked the Pfiffner Traverse, which is a high route that goes through the Rocky Mountains of Colorado, kind of along the Front Range, along the Continental Divide. It starts at Milner Pass in Rocky Mountain National Park and goes all the way to Berthoud Pass, sort of near Winter Park. In the spirit of learning and it being my first high route, I wanted to sort of share some things that I learned and answer a couple questions that I've gotten across YouTube, Instagram, DMs, etc. There should be hopefully a lot of good info in here if you're hoping to hike the Pfiffner Traverse, but also just if you're trying to plan your first high route in general. I hope this helps you gain a little bit of confidence and answers some of the questions that you might have. The first question that I have is from my friend Bronte, which is, what surprised you? And honestly, after hiking the CDT, I've been a little bit burnt out with backpacking, but the idea of a high route has always really interested me, and I felt like I kind of had to try it now or never. Couldn't really tell you exactly why that was the feeling, but that's just the truth. I will tell you, my nerves before doing the Pfiffner Traverse were really high. I haven't really done anything like this before. I've done some off-trail stuff, but nothing for extended periods of time. And I don't always do super great with exposure, so I wasn't sure how much there'd be and how much that would get to me. And so I was just super nervous going into this. I'm not sure what it is about living in a nice place and having a roof over your head and sleeping in bed every night with running water, but something about doing that for an extended period of time for me allows self-doubt to creep back in. Even though I know I can do hard stuff, I kind of forget if I spend too long in the comforts of society, I guess. So basically, I was surprised, I think, by how much I loved it, and how much it re-inspired me to really reignite my love for backpacking. Not that it ever really went away, but I feel this excitement now that I haven't felt probably since being on the PCT, to be honest with you. It really surprised me how much I loved the route finding, the scrambling, everything that I was super nervous about is what I really loved about this route. Patches60 asks, were there any class 3 or higher sections that you had to do? So there are class 3 sections on the route, I believe on Paiute Pass and Northeast Gully, but we actually bypassed both of those, just feeling a little bit like maybe we didn't want to push it too far for our first time. That said, you shouldn't exceed class 3 on this route unless, you kind of route find incorrectly. But I think that would be kind of hard to do. However, if that is your thing and you want to go and spice it up and have more scrambling, Skurka includes some extra credit routes in his guide that I definitely recommend. The guide. I can't speak to the extra credit routes. Glaze Hikes asks, the value of going with a partner versus flying solo. For me, going with a partner was absolutely invaluable. Because of my nerves, I'm not sure that I would have even followed through if I had been by myself, but I think something about having that commitment to Leslie, my hiking partner for this route, made me follow through. And it also kind of helped calm me down a little bit, knowing that there was someone else there that I could bounce route finding ideas off of, or someone there for the more scrambly sections to kind of help figure out what to do and the best way to go. I also know she has experience with climbing and route finding, so that was very calming for me. And just having someone else there, especially in the sketchier sections, which we didn't do that many of, but knowing that there was someone there if something were to happen, even if it's just a twisted ankle, it's a lot better than knowing you might have to go through that alone. So for me, I think, at least for high routes, having a partner is something that is really important to me, and I probably would only want to go with a partner, at least for now. I'm just not comfortable doing that stuff solo. I will say, when it comes to choosing a partner, I think it's important to choose a partner that is, one, savvy in the backcountry already. You don't want to go into a high route with someone who might be new to backpacking, or at least that would be my preference. If you know that that's the case and you are willing to go a little bit slower, just keep that in mind. But I think it's important to have someone who is already pretty experienced as far as backpacking goes. And two, I think this is really crucial, is having someone who has a similar risk tolerance to you, so that neither of you are pushing each other too far or holding each other back. I think a high route could be a potentially frustrating experience with someone if you go into it thinking that they're going to be game for all the same things you are and they're not, or if you go into it and they're pushing you to do things that you really don't feel safe doing. I think Leslie and I aligned really well on that, and that worked really well for us. So I would just say, have in-depth conversations about what those tolerances are before going in, and also just be aware that sometimes people might think they're okay with something and then they get into it and it's a lot scarier than they expected, and just be open to that flexibility, and know that if you're going to go into it together, you're going to come out of it together. You have to be willing to do whatever it is your partner does if you're taking this on with a partner, in my opinion. Anna Williston asked if there are gear or packing differences compared to regular backpacking. Specifically for the Pfiffner Traverse, there are a few differences. Typically, you have to have a hard-sided bear canister in Rocky Mountain National Park and some of the designated sites in Indian Peaks. So as an FYI, a hard-sided bear canister, at least for now, also includes Ursacks with an aluminum liner, not just an Ursack by itself. You need that aluminum liner. But that makes a huge difference as far as weight. It's about a pound lighter than a hard-sided bear canister, so that was big for us. We realized that like right before we left. That said, we also did need snow gear for this high route. I think this will vary based on season, obviously, and the particular high route that you're doing. But we had a lot of snow this year in Colorado, so we needed snow gear for Northeast Gully for sure, potentially Paiute Pass. Even though we ended up bypassing both of those, we did bring micro spikes and an ice axe, and judging on some other trip reports I've read since then, I think those things would have been pretty helpful for both of those passes. Another thing I would definitely recommend for anything off trail is some sort of pants. I personally use rain pants for the Pfiffner. They're kind of dual purpose. I knew we might get some monsoon summer storms, and then I also did use my rain pants for the bushwhacking sections that we had to do. And I would say, even if you don't have rain pants, you're gonna want some kind of pants or your legs are gonna get torn up. One thing that I also did differently for this route versus maybe my typical summer backpacking is I did use my larger pack. It's the same one I used on the CDT, but unfortunately I could not fit 7 days of food with the liner and the Ursack in my 30 liter that I love. So you might need to do the same unless you're a crazy ultralight packer. Also, if you're faster and you only end up needing like 5 days of food, you might not need as big of a pack as I did. From Danny, my Instagram friend, aka Unapologetically Wild, she asks, were there permits? And oh man, were there permits. So the entire Pfiffner Traverse, pretty much besides the last 20-ish miles, requires permits. It's about a 76-mile route, so depending how you break that up, you can need anywhere from 3 to 5 permits. Personally, Leslie and I had 5 permitted nights, 2 in Rocky Mountain, 3 in Indian Peaks. And I would say that was a pretty generous itinerary. If you're a little bit faster or you have off-trail experience, you could probably get away with 1 night in Rocky Mountain. No nights would be really, really hard. And you could probably get away with maybe 2 in Indian Peaks, although it's hard for me to say because we bypassed some of that stuff. That said, I recommend starting your route planning in February because the Rocky Mountain National Park permits are released in March and the Indian Peaks ones are as well. I don't know if it's like this every year, but luckily this year, Rocky Mountain released first, and then about a week later, Indian Peaks released, and I think that helps a lot because you can kind of do your first couple nights in Rocky Mountain and then fill in Indian Peaks based on how Rocky Mountain shakes out. Another important note when it comes to permits is we did see rangers pretty much every single day, and we did have our permits checked. I think in some wilderness areas, people think they can kind of get away with not having permits, but personally, I would not advise it. I think you're very likely to get checked. Another quick note about the Rocky Mountain permits is if you are going to reserve 2, you're gonna need 2 people to do it, or you're gonna have to be very fast with one because of the way that it's structured on recreation.gov. They release in zones and you're only allowed to reserve in one specific zone per transaction, which is really frustrating because if you're doing a route like the Pfiffner, you're going to need permits in different zones. So luckily Leslie and I were each able to get one. That also means we paid twice, which is, annoying, but that's just the reality for now. So something to consider. My other tips for permits are 2 things. 1, consider the elevation change that you're going to be doing each day rather than the mileage. We had a day that was 13 miles in like 5,100 feet, and it took us all day. A lot of it was off trail. If we had tried to go farther, even though maybe on paper both Leslie and I could definitely do more than 13 miles in a day, we were pooped. It took us all day. Just keep that in mind. Another thing is to be conscious of any reroutes you might want to do. For us, We kind of lucked out the first day with our weather reroute. Our campsite was still super easy to get to, but once we decided to bypass Paiute Pass in Northeast Gully, our campsite was in a very inconvenient spot for that. So it's something to consider when you're looking at zones. Is there a zone that's a little bit more flexible? Danny also asked if I had map reading skills or did I learn on the fly? And Jake Eva 9802 asked if Skurka's guide was easy enough to follow. Did I use GPS or just paper maps? So I did have quite a bit of familiarity with reading topos, at least digitally on my phone, even without following a specific trail. I did that a little bit on the CDT a few times, and I just kind of tend to look at them because I know that I'm interested in this kind of stuff. So I kind of had some familiarity with that, but I did take a map and compass class specifically to prepare for this route. That is an essential skill, I think, to have before you ever go off trail. And honestly, if you're going in the backcountry at all, it's a really good skill to have, having a map and compass, knowing how to use it. That helped me a lot with my confidence going into this route. We used Skurka's maps from his guide to plan a lot, so I think being able to read them is important. We would lay them out each night and look at them, kind of assess our route for the next day. That said, I honestly did not pull the paper maps out a lot during the day while we were hiking. Leslie and I both plotted points in digital GPS apps, so like Caltopo and Gaia, and we kind of used those as a quicker reference while we were actually hiking. And I also used like the digital compass on that, but I knew that I had the maps, the paper maps and compass as backup if anything were to happen to my phone or Leslie's phone. We knew that we could still follow the route without anything digital. It just honestly is a little bit faster to use your phone and maybe a GPS point than plotting things out on a paper map, but we knew how. And then to answer the question more specifically about Skurka's guide, I think it was as easy to follow as it was designed to be. I don't think I could not have done this route without it. His descriptions were really helpful. I actually used that a lot during the day. I downloaded the PDF that had the description of the route, and that made it a lot easier to navigate throughout the day. He doesn't get super specific, and I think that's by design. It's supposed to be a route finding journey. You're supposed to kind of make some of those decisions yourself. So I really appreciated that he left it sort of vague, but good enough to follow. I, again, just definitely recommend getting it if you're going to do the Pfiffner. Intrepid Salamander or Corey asked, how much snow do you think is the right amount of snow for the Northeast Gully? Honestly, I don't know that I have the right amount of experience to answer this question, but my gut tells me that once you have a summer snowpack, like a solid consolidated summer snowpack, that the Northeast Gully would honestly be easier with snow in it because you'd have something to kick into, either with crampons or spikes or your axe. Whereas I think that without any snow, it sounds like it's all just really loose, really steep scree, which I know it's kind of like taking one step forward, two steps back from my experiences in hiking in really steep scree. So I would imagine that the snow actually makes it a little bit easier as long as it's not early season snow or way too much snow. KD6 Bam asks what I did to secure food. Did I use an Ursack or hang or nothing? So I did carry an Ursack with an aluminum liner, as I sort of touched on earlier, and I hung that at night. Either that or a bear can, again, is required by Rocky Mountain National Park and parts of Indian Peaks, and they will check before they give you your permits. So don't try and get around it. Unfortunately, I didn't write down who asked this question, but they asked, what is your average liter of water to miles walked, and what is the average water carry? So personally, I usually aim for 1 liter every 4 miles. That's a very general rule. It can vary quite a bit based on climate and what kind of water sources I have, but that's what I generally shoot for when I'm just kind of not trying to think about it. That said, I don't think I carried more than 3 liters on the entire Pfiffner Traverse, and I think this year I could have gotten away with not even carrying that much. I don't think I ever really needed more than 2. There's a lot of water on the Pfiffner, especially in the beginning if you're going north to south, because it is very pass and valley. The only time that you really have to worry about water on the Pfiffner is when you're going to be on the divide for an extended period of time. That's something that I learned on the CDT last year as well, is even if you're in an area like the Rockies that has tons of natural water, if you're up on the tippy top of the divide, you're not where any of the water is, and it's a pain to get down to. I think we ran into a lot more water this year just because we had a really high snow year in the Rockies in Colorado. So there was water in places like James Peak that might not always be super reliable. That being said, I think the biggest section to watch out for is the 20-mile stretch towards Berthoud Pass at the very end. If you don't drop off the divide and it's a low snow year, I could definitely see that whole section being dry. However, we did drop off the divide halfway through that stretch to camp at a lake, and so that kind of solved any water issues we may have had there. I also think that's a great way to avoid afternoon storms along the James Peak skyline. So if you're doing it like during monsoon season like we did, I recommend breaking up that stretch anyway. Thank you so much for watching my Pfiffner Traverse Q&A. I hope it was helpful if you're planning to do it or planning to do your first high route. Please feel free to leave me any extra questions in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. Thanks so much for watching and happy hiking.